Well, hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Mustard Seed Leadership Podcast. We are on week 3 of a series called Raising Up Large Capacity Leaders. What are some of those things that keep our capacity small? What can we do to enlarge our capacity? And in so doing, how do we bring through other large capacity leaders around us? Now, this material is all taken from a beautiful book Dudley wrote. Dudley Daniels wrote a book called Biblical Leadership. I'm looking at chapters 6 through 8, where he speaks about raising up large capacity leaders. It's a free download from ncmi.net. In the notes, you can have a look. There's a link. It'll take you straight there. Now, first 2 episodes, we looked at number 1, to grow our capacity, we need a larger theology in order to enlarge our capacity. In other words, our concept of God, our revelation of God has to grow. And number 2, we need to enlarge our capacity for people who are different to us. People who are different shouldn't intimidate us or hold us back, but rather we can grow with them and enlarge our capacity together. I want to look at 2 more today, so let's move quickly. Number 3, we need to enlarge our capacity for people who do things better than we do. How do you work with, how do you react to people who are simply better than you? Do they intimidate you? Are you insecure, or do you bring them on and grow as a team together? Dudley said it like this: why is it that those who are leading churches often struggle to bring people through who can do things better than they can? Sometimes leaders struggle so much with this that they make it difficult for those individuals to stay in their church. And I've shared before the illustration. One pastor shared with me how he saw the church as a pride of lions with a dominant male lion, and he's happy to have all of his lionesses around him. But every time a male cub is born, that alpha male will kill or chase away that male lion cub out of insecurity that one day that cub is going to threaten him and try and take over his position. And sadly, that's what it's like for so many leaders. If you're threatened by people who are better than you in an area, do you make space for them on your team so the team can get better, or do you drive them away out of your own insecurity? Here's another quote. If someone can preach better than we can prophesy better than us, can win more people to Jesus than we can, or can release power and signs and wonders and miracles more than we can, why is it that we will not let them stay? Often it is because we have a small capacity ourselves. When we have a small capacity, then these people cause us to feel threatened, and we feel we have to get them out. What we should do is become large capacity people who are able to handle being surrounded by those who can do things better than we can without being threatened. That's why we've got to grow our capacity so that we can make space for bigger capacity people around us. 2 comments. Remember John Maxwell? I've spoken often about that law of the lid. Why is this so critical? Because our leadership capacity sets the ceiling on the type of leaders who we can attract and develop. Remember, if you're a 6 out of 10 leader, you can only attract and develop leaders up to about 5 out of 10. But if you become an 8 out of 10, you can grow, develop, and attract leaders up to 7 out of 10. In other words, our capacity as leaders sets the ceiling or the lid on the growth of our church or organization. That's why it's so critical that we grow our leadership capacity. And secondly, this sense of being threatened by people who do things better than ourselves is rooted in insecurity. Insecurity is a killer in leadership. Our insecurities are exposed when others do things better than we do. And right at that moment, either we have to grow ourselves and become secure and make space for them, or it's our insecurities that are going to drive them away and keep the organization small. The fact is that only thing a leader needs to be best at is bringing out the best in others. So this is a huge point. Number 3, big capacity leaders celebrate people who can do things better than themselves instead of being threatened by them. It's a big one, and I really pray that we as leaders can grow through it. Let's have a look quickly at number 4 then. Large capacity leaders are people who can cope with change. Remember someone once said, the only thing that's here to stay is change. How do we cope with change? Coming through seasons of pandemic and COVID and all of these things, we've had so much change so quickly. How are you handling? Are you able to cope with change? Here's a Dudley quote. Our ability to embrace change also impacts on the capacity we have as people and as leaders. We should ask ourselves this question: am I really willing to let God enlarge me? We can study and work with the best leaders, but if we cannot develop our own capacity in and for God, we will go nowhere. Leaders must trust God to enlarge them so that they are big enough to cope with whatever comes their way. Now, how do you know? Leaders, how do you know when God's trying to enlarge you? What does it actually feel like when God wants to increase your capacity? Well, personally, I've discovered, it feels like being overwhelmed. And that makes sense. If you feel overwhelmed, it means you have this sense of, I'm out of control. Can I keep things together? Basically, that's what it feels like when you've reached your current capacity. And it makes sense. If God wants to enlarge our capacity, we have to push through that sense of being overwhelmed. And no one likes that feeling. In fact, you might hear yourself say things like, I can't handle this anymore, or this is unsustainable. Now, I'm not advocating burnout or living under that constant pressure for too long. But at the same time, leaders, we can't always back off just because we're starting to feel overwhelmed. If we want to get into God's larger capacity, we have to push through that sense of being overwhelmed, trusting and believing, God, with you, I can do more. So remember the boys, the disciples of Jesus, they were together in the boat and the storm was raging. And what was Jesus doing? He was allowing that storm. In fact, he was setting up the disciples to reveal himself as the one who calms the storm. Now, in the same way, sometimes we feel like our capacity's swamped. The waves are crashing into our boat. We're going down. Fear is rising. Sometimes that's exactly what God is allowing to bring us to that point of revealing himself. He's the God who calms the storm because he wants to enlarge our capacity. So, monitor your thinking and your self-talk. If you catch yourself grumbling and complaining and feeling overwhelmed on the inside, this could be God trying to enlarge you. So stop and ask yourself this question, Lord, how are you trying to grow my capacity here? How's your capacity for change? Big point number 4, big capacity leaders are committed to being stretched rather than shrinking back into their comfort zones. So let me leave you with a couple of questions, 3 questions to ponder, maybe personally or as a team. Number 1, how do you feel really when others on your team do things better than you? Does insecurity kick in, or do you celebrate their success? Question number 2, if you had to measure your leadership lid right now as a score out of 10, 5 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 9 out of 10, what would you give yourself and why? And then question number 3, do you ever struggle with feelings of being overwhelmed? Have you ever seen this as God trying to enlarge your boat? So I hope it helps. These are important things for us as leaders. Let's grow our capacity so that God can do more in us and through us. Hope it's helpful. Can't wait to see you again next week. Until then, God bless and bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Remember, if you like the notes that come along with this episode or any one of our past episodes, you can visit outlookchurch.co.za/mustardseed leadership, where you can see all our past episodes, all the resources and notes that go along with this. Until next time, keep growing.